And I tell you,
I have another route with sidewalks.
Excellent.
We encountered roadkill yesterday on our way home.
And we both kind of saw it at the same time. What?
I don't, like that far from stepping on it.
Yeesh.
All right.
Hit by a golf cart, or?
I don't think so, because I was outside the course.
Oh, you're outside. Okay.
Yeah, it was.
It was definitely a house pet.
Yeah.
That was
Yeah.
Oh,
And
God.
identifiable and everything. All right.
We're rolling.
Okay.
Sorry.
Whenever you're ready.
Okay. I'm Hannah Glover, reporter with Ignites. I'm here with George Wilbanks from Russell Reynolds Associates. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Hannah. Thanks for having me.
So we're at the NICSA conference with a bunch of technology and operations professionals, and you're a headhunter. What are you doing here?
Well, we've got a lot of work in this area. So we've got the long spears out, and we're hunting big game. So, no, seriously, it is interesting. As we look across our work in the last year and a half, in the face of this downfall, we have seen a drop-off in most of our traditional recruiting activities. But one of the areas that firms seem to be getting their wallets out and spending a little more discretionary money and time on is the whole issue of expense control. Historically, the money management business has been just given a huge deed of goodwill and good fortune. Market rates of growth, asset valuations going up because market rates rose, flows of funds coming in from pension funds, you name it. This is an industry that for 30 years has had just the good times rolling, really. So top line revenues grew 20, 30% some years, and nobody ever thought about expenses because that led to rates of profitability that were frequently in excess of 30%. Now you look at today, you look forward a year or two, and I don't think anybody's predicting a market back to a S&P of 1,500 in the next year or two, so you're looking at flat markets, so you're not going to see revenues grow because of assets under management growing because of market valuations. And you then say, okay, capital flows are restricted, investors are much more cautious, and in a restricted capital flow environment, gaining market share at the expense of competitors, I think, again, people will be very hesitant to forecast more than 3 to 5% top-line revenue growth from market share growth. So therefore, if you can't grow your top line by even 10%, how are you going to keep the profitability going? How are you going to keep your engine going that keeps your firm viable, whether you're public or private? And I think the focus is all of a sudden really coming around very quickly to expense management. And historically, in your operations function is where most of your expenses are in delivering the services, and technology, broadly defined in many industries, this is just common knowledge, has proven to be a great place to make investments for innovation and expense management. So we're seeing very interesting searches in technology, in software services companies, CEO for a small software service, two small software services companies in the asset management business just in the last 12 months, and a build out of a European software services company in the US. So it's become a very important part of our search work. It's up significantly. Our business is off significantly in 2009, but within that, the area of fastest growth has been in technology and operations. So it's very interesting to watch. So here I am trying to participate in that.
And we heard a lot about sort of the focus on operations from Abigail Johnson and also from executives from Franklin talking about that too.
Yep.
But it seems like you're talking about third-party providers as well, companies looking to outsource.
Absolutely. It's across the industry. Major fund companies internally are looking to technology as an innovator to save money on client service costs, on infrastructure costs. But the service vendors to the industry, whether you are providing investment analytics, or you're doing transfer agency and fund accounting software, or you're doing a very large strategic offshoring, strategic partnering proposition, as we've seen many of the security services firms do over the years. Across that continuum, all of those activities are getting a fresh look now. And obviously some of the more complex of those initiatives where you take 100 or 1,000 employees and move them to India, the Philippines, or Costa Rica, or somewhere like that. Those take years to negotiate and implement. But there are also much smaller initiatives that you can take discretionary technology investments that might have historically been focused on new product development or enhanced client services in a growth-oriented environment. Instead of spending it there on the client-facing front office space, you might now be looking at making investments in the middle office or the back office to try and wring out some cost control measures. So that's it's across the whole landscape. But there are near-term benefits. There are much longer-term initiatives we know are underway, and we're seeing discussions about those in the marketplace. So.
And then last year we talked a lot about the cuts, huge amounts of layoffs, numbers of people out, and then this year was followed by, well, in the past year has been a lot of merger and acquisition activity. So if you're on the market, what should you do?
You know, for an industry that saw literally since the mid-'70s just an enormous amount of growth and very little pullback, the asset and wealth management business broadly defined, if we could call it that, this is really a watershed. It's a tipping point. There are excellent executives at every level of management who, because of mergers, defaults, because of the volatile markets, of smaller firms that in 2005, 2007 would have clearly made it, couldn't make it in the last 2 years. There are a lot of really good people. I mean, I think, you know, you read about it in the papers, this is sort of the jobless recovery, where clearly things have stabilized. You know, the market is broadly about where it was at the end of 2008, at the end of 2009. A little bit of a pullback the last month, but everybody expects that sort of volatility. So things aren't tremendously worse than they were a year ago. And yet we've got a lot of really good people out of work. I don't know whether that number is 5% for the industry or 20% or whatever the number is, but there are a lot of good people out of work. So I would say in the face of this jobless recovery, there are a few things you could do. It's very clear you need to stay active in the marketplace. And the easiest place to do that is take your Rolodex and get on the road and go meet the people that you know and tell them about what you're doing, tell them about the things you're finding interesting. That's always a very useful tool, and I expect everyone's doing that. I think getting involved with industry associations, volunteer time is desperately in short supply at any not-for-profit, and an industry association clearly falls into that category, whether it's helping organize a conference or help them write white papers and provide information dynamically going up on their website. There are always opportunities for volunteer work within an association. And here's a point in time, if you're unemployed for unfortunate reasons, to stay visible to your peers, stay active in the industry. I think that's an excellent tool. And I think it's very important to think about it in terms of a marketing campaign. There are many avenues to get potential employers information on why you might be right. Obviously, recruiters are part of that network, but that network's much more broad. I mean, you have to have a mission, you have to have a plan, you've got to get an advertising campaign in your mind that you're going after certain targets. I always recommend make a list of every firm that you'd be interested in working for, and then have a file for each one, and then set yourself a goal. In some fashion, even if it's a cold call to the head of human resources or to the CEO, depending on what level you're looking at, make sure you have a consistent set of contacts targeted at those institutions that you're willing to consider. So I think there's lots of things you can do to stay busy, to stay engaged, and not just sit and wait. You have to be proactive about it, and that's the main thing.
And also, we've talked a lot in the past year about the way compensation has changed, and a lot more going to sort of fixed compensation versus variable comp. What have you seen, and are those changes going to stick?
I think so. I mean, I've had a lot of conversations in the last year with a number of different people that are in the regulatory infrastructure, that are at compensation consultants, that are at our clients' organizations, both line managers as well as comp and benefits people. And I think there was a little bit of a fallacy over the last 15 or 20 years with the prosperity of the growth of the markets, certainly since the mid-'80s, that variable compensation went from being 10 or 30% of base salary to infrequently in more senior levels of management. Let's say in a major asset management company, the top decile of employees might have been seeing incentive variable compensation worth 100% or 200% of base salary. How much of that after a decade is really variable, truly? I mean, my proposition would be that a smaller and smaller portion of that over time, people are essentially living to the level of their compensation, particularly if it's consistent over 3 to 5 years. And therefore, from a company's point of view, it's quite unrealistic to be saying, oh, our cost base is very low, base salaries are 125 when you're actually paying people 300. The likelihood is that people really they consider their lifestyle to be 200 or 250. So the variable component of that is much smaller than it appears to be in sort of the traditional compensation design. So whether it's because of TARP, and the decision that variable pay cannot be more than a certain portion. So the TARP-assisted banks are having a big overhang effect on a lot of the other non-banking businesses, some of which obviously are affiliated with TARP banks and some of which are independent. But the concept of reevaluating what is fixed cost and what is variable cost in compensation design is clearly getting a rethink, and I do think some of it's just rational. It's just meeting the expectations of the marketplace. Less of compensation that we might have thought is actually variable. So seeing base salaries for managing directors that are making $500,000 move from $120,000, $150,000 to $225,000 or $250,000 is not really changing the dynamics of the industry. It's just changing the definitions a little bit and matching the reality.
How does it impact total comp?
I don't think it does. I mean, total compensation is off because it matches profitability, and profitability was down last year. But as profitability recovers, I don't think you're going to see the percentage of compensation benefits as a total of revenues falling precipitously. Firms have the ability and the profitability to pay out that money. This is a people business, and people are your intellectual capital. They are what drive the profits over time. So seeing compensation, total rewards from a financial perspective ranging between 35 and 50% of total revenues isn't going to change dramatically, I don't think.
And we talked a little bit about tech being an opportunity for hiring. What other areas do you see picking up hiring in 2010?
Boy, you know, I'll tell you, the industry is still moving very cautiously. It's hard I think client-facing roles in general, as firms focus on what have I done well and how do I hold on to those clients. Client service roles, anything that's client-facing is getting a lot more attention now, mainly for the issue of retention. They just want to do a better job. And if they can upgrade their talent during a period of a soft market, when it would have been much more difficult to hire people in distribution roles, whether that's strategic marketing, whether that's client service, whether that's sales. That's one area that we're seeing some fairly aggressive work, but I wouldn't say that's expanding the employment pool. That's really an upgrading mission. I think in the area of marketing in general, there are opportunities where firms are beginning to focus on what I would call new media. The industry, if you think about the extremes, you know, you put financial services in one extreme using almost none of this, and the media and entertainment business sort of adapting Twitter and, you know, building the brands around entertainment figures. They're at the other end of the extreme. There's probably, you know, I doubt I'm going to see a portfolio manager twittering around, you know, considerations on portfolio choices for regulatory reasons, if for no other reason. But on the other hand, is there some happy medium where they can use many of the tools of social networking and new media, YouTube and things like that for educational purposes, for communication purposes? We've seen 4 searches in that area in the last year, which are all new positions. So that's an interesting one. And I've seen 4 or 5 other firms add people in like a digital marketing director type roles. So I think that's an area. And then, as I said, the whole technology function as an enabler for expense savings and operations is one that's getting a lot of attention. And again, I don't think that's a situation where those are markets that are expanding their employment pool, but they're changing the mix of how they're spending that T&O dollar from sort of more of a new product, new service initiative that's client-facing to more focusing on the infrastructure and controlling costs.
And again, we heard today that is client-facing at the end of the day, right?
It should be, yes, absolutely. I think 2 or 3 of the panels have talked about that issue of if you can raise the predictability and the consistency of your client service through your infrastructure and your operations, you're going to build client loyalty. So, yep.
And what about because although total comp may not be down, you know, as you mentioned, revenue's down, pay is down. Right. How do you keep people engaged?
That's a really interesting thing. We just finished an entire panel on that the guys at NICSA were interested in having us do. Total rewards concepts. The industry, financial services as a whole, I wouldn't just say money managers, but financial industry as a whole has probably become far too dependent on financial rewards, extrinsic rewards, where pay and promotion are because of a rapidly expanding pie and a more profitable, more rich pie as it goes along. It was a shortcut. Managers could simply say to an employee, you did a great job, here's more money, do it again next year, and spend very little time on the communication of that and all the other pieces that go around it. And now that pie has shrunk, it's probably going to stay a little leaner for quite a while. And firms are reassessing if they can't pay more every year, and in fact compensation falls back below a level of the lifestyle expectations of some employees, which it did last year. It did for many firms in 2008, it did for most firms in 2009, and I think 2010 is going to be another lean year. Even if compensation doesn't fall further, if it doesn't increase a lot from last year, people are still in the same game of not making what they thought they needed to live. So lifestyles are threatened in many ways for some employees at the higher end of compensation levels. So this total rewards concept is it's about intrinsic benefits. It's about things that don't revolve around money or title or that sort of thing. And that's it's an area of human resources scientific study for 20 years outside of financial services, looking at right now the rubric used to be all about culture, now it's called employment engagement, different terms for the same concept, but making the investment to spend more time with your employees, to communicate with them more frequently, to provide greater transparency. This happens with managers walking the walk and talking the talk, and instead of a chief investment officer spending all of their time out trying to generate alpha, picking stocks themselves, and doing one-on-ones with their staff, and really engaging them in the culture of why are we here, why are we doing this, and making them feel like their careers are going somewhere. Same with the sales organization. A lot of heads of sales that I know today, after the last decade, they're the big cannons. They get on the road, they do 100,000 miles a year, they're out there closing that big piece of business, and they believe the production of that selling process is their highest and best use. When in fact, if they were doing the job, I think, in a more holistic fashion around total rewards, they'd be spending 30 or 40% of their time, again, one-on-one with employees, teaching, developing, mentoring, communicating the strategy, building a rapport and a community amongst the sales organization and the client service team and the strategic marketers. That's very, very time-consuming exercises. The one I like to cite is for a well-known firm for its culture has a thing called skip meetings. Twice a year, every manager meets with the direct reports to their direct reports. So a division executive has 10 direct reports. He will then each one of those direct reports has 10 direct reports. So one senior manager then goes and spends an hour with each of 100 people who are the direct reports to their direct reports. Now, hopefully organizations are a little leaner than that. You get more than 6 or 7 direct reports, and it's hard to manage. So maybe the number is 50, not 100. But I know plenty of organizations where managers have 12 direct reports, and you get into a call center and they've got 15 teams reporting to them, and so you begin to add this up. Even if it were 150 hours, the average person works 2,500 hours a year. We're talking about a commitment in one exercise of 5 or 10% of that senior manager's entire billable hours in their entire time. And that's a big effort that I don't think people really have focused in on the time commitment it takes to do this right. So,
you talk about 30, 40%, I think a lot of managers kind of balk at that.
Totally.
But why is it important for the organization?
If you have an organizational culture that people value, they're coming to work for something other than the money. And that's a very important transition for a lot of financial services firms, for employees to feel like at every level, whether you are on the executive committee or whether you're a call center employee or whether you are in the mailroom, that tie into the culture. If you are engaged, you will show up with less absenteeism if we're starting at the bottom. You will be better at recruiting new people to the firm. If you have a friend, you become an advocate for your firm. You stay longer. I'm the bad guy, okay? I'm out there trying to acquire human resources for my clients, and the weaker of the culture firms, it's easier for us to pick off smart, talented, rising young stars within those organizations. So if you strengthen that culture, you're less likely to lose these people. You hire a new person, whether you hire them at a job fair out of college or you hire them in the C-suite, with a big package that catches up in the newsletters, At any level, when someone arrives at a company, they're usually technically proficient. They are capable of doing the job. What trips them up in the first year is their lack of ability to get integrated into the culture. And some of that's their ability to gain the trust of the organization, but some of it's the trust of the employees at the firm to accept a new person. There's a certain degree of risk in that. If your culture is holistic and it's deep and people come to work for a set of values that's other than just money around the mission and purpose of the firm, they're going to be more trusting, they're going to be more inclusive, and you're going to have fewer failures like this. So it's a very important sort of fabric to making the firm more efficient, to making it move and collaborate better, which again, it's about efficiency. You capture a lot of, and it's infectious with clients. If a team shows up to pitch a piece of business with a client, so let's say the sales guy does his job, knocks on the door, gets the proposition, you get into the quarterfinals, you got the portfolio manager there, you win. They say, you guys can do the job, so now you're in the finals. And they say, we'd like to do a site visit. And the team from the firm comes, and they're going to give you $1 billion in a joint venture arrangement for 3 years, and the contract's worth $50 or $100 million a year, that sort of thing. And they show up and they walk the halls. Better believe it, they're going to pick up on the culture. They're going to feel the advocacy of every employee and how engaged they are. And I think that makes a big difference. It's infectious with clients, with competitors. It really works.
You also talk about deleveraging and the risk of losing a star if you don't kind of spread the culture.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, again, if you're going to grow your organization at 10%, all right, so you've got 10% new revenues and new clients coming in a year. And you know for sure you're going to lose probably 5 or 10% of your employees every year because of just changes happen. A spouse moves, they decide to go back to school, whatever it is. You've got to grow your organization, and if you're going to grow by 10% and you're going to lose 10, you got to grow by 20. You've got to hire 20% new people each year. The more reliable it gets, the more you can press down that retention number so that you lose fewer people, and the easier you can make it from a recruiting point of view in terms of your ability to attract the best from your competitors to come and join you. It can have big, rapidly compounding effects on the ability to grow the firm and grow it in a healthy fashion.
I think that those are the questions, right?
Yeah, it's good.
Great.
Thanks, guys.